All right, everybody, welcome back to another video. Here I have a video titled, Why the Ivy League Class Controls America. Before we dive right in, I want to ask you a question. Do you think the Ivy League controls America? Why or why not? Put that down in the comments below. And without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in.
A Harvard education consists of what you learn at Harvard while you are not studying. James Bryant Conant.
Harvard, Princeton, Dartmouth, Cornell, Columbia, Penn, and of course, Yale. In this video, I'm going to be discussing the Ivy League and its role in perpetuating class in America. Is the Ivy League just simply a finishing school for the elite, or are the Ivy Leagues truly the opportunity for merit to rise to the top of society and to shine? Welcome to Analyzing Finance with Nick. Today, we're going deep into the Ivy League and with the
Just to give my initial thoughts, I've always thought the Ivy League was simply a lesser version for a country club, right? If you live in mansions and you're a high net worth individual, you want to send your kids to schools with other high net worth individuals. One, for networking purposes, but two, if they could get around that strong social circle, their life is pretty much going to be set afterwards if they play their cards right. Now, I'm sure it gets a lot deeper than that, and I'm hoping he goes into that. Let's find out.
The recent Varsity Blues scandal about 5 years ago, a lot more data really on the underbelly of how admissions and how selection to the Ivy League has become more publicly available. And so it gives us a true opportunity to kind of deep dive into like the truth behind what's going on at these institutions. I'm going to be fully transparent. I do have some biases going into this video about the Ivy League. I did not personally go to an Ivy League and was rejected from the Ivy Leagues that I applied to back when I was in high school. However, I have a lot of close friends and colleagues who have gone to Ivy Leagues, whether on the undergraduate or the graduate level, and that is kind of my perspective on this. Also, back when I was working in finance, a lot of the top investment firms were a lot pickier on academic resumes, and so I had my applications thrown out a lot simply not going to an Ivy League school. I've managed to advance in my career despite being from a quote-unquote non-target. But nonetheless, if I have some of my biases on the Ivy League against them, that might be why. So first of all, when it comes to getting the Ivy League, how much of it is privilege versus how much of it is merit? Well, historically, going to college, especially before the GI Bill in World War II, was privilege. And so therefore, Ivy Leagues didn't have to be that selective. If you had the money to go to the Ivy League, they would let you in. Even the Harvards and the Yales had admission rates above 50% for most of the first half of the 20th century. However, as college got more democratized and became more valuable of a status symbol, the value of an Ivy League degree went up, and the demand for an Ivy League degree went up without really classroom sizes expanding. And so as a result, it became increasingly more selective. And in the Cold War, an era of equality and equal opportunity was highly prioritized. The Ivy Leagues got a lot of pushback for favoring old money. And as a result, the Ivy Leagues instituted a lot of policies such as affirmative action and just in general prioritizing people from first generation college backgrounds or non-traditional backgrounds, or just selecting more based on academic merit.
And I want to pause right here because one of the things that gets thrown off, at least in spaces where people don't really think, is they'll make it seem like these Ivy Leagues and just brands in general that are at that level, they don't have to advertise because their work speaks for themselves and yada, 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 right? Like, it's like somebody says you've never seen a Rolls Royce commercial, right? If you guys ever seen something like that or heard something like that, I want you to be very careful with that, because what you're doing is you're making it seem, not you, but like they're making it seem like it's in a class of its own when it's really not. They're just appearing and advertising a different way. How many times did you grow up and you watched a movie and they made it a big deal if they went to an Ivy League school? Like, oh, he went to Harvard. Harvard. Oh, he went to Yale. Oh, he did this. Oh, he did. They do it very subtly, and because they're trying to match like high academics or high privilege with that Ivy League school or whatever, right? You can see this a lot if you ever watch like the old Fast and Furious movies or any type of what's it called, mainstream spy movie or whatever. They always have a scene where they like open the garage and then make a big deal that it's a Lamborghini, or they open the garage and make it a big deal that it's a Porsche or whatever. That's how they're advertising. They're not like, hey, come to our school, we would love to have you. That's traditional advertising. The way that people advertise when you're at that level is you simply associate yourself with whoever it is that you want the demographic. So of course, you'll never see somebody who's poor, who's a janitor or whatever, be associated with Ivy League schools, because again, the Ivy League does not want to place themselves with them. They're saying, hey, we're Ivy League, we're only for the rich and the famous and da. And that's how they cement themselves over the years. You got to remember, these colleges and these brands have been here for, I want to say, hundreds of years by now. So it started at the beginning and they just slowly ingrained to the point that whenever I mention these things, it already has a status symbol to it, simply because of how they position themselves over the past years.
Than on social privilege and connections. However, even on paper, if the Ivy League tries to brand itself purely as a merit-based institution, the reality really is not the case. However, at the same time, it's not purely a finishing school. You have to have top grades to get into an Ivy League school, even as a legacy student. So how do people get into Ivy League schools? Like, it's not just perfect GPA and SATs, because there are thousands of applicants who have perfect GPAs and SATs who are rejected from the Ivy League universities. So it's a mix.
And that's another thing. When you're talking about Ivy League school, he said you have to have the perfect grades and the perfect SATs. Trust me when I say there are hidden communities. There are hidden communities where people are cheating on that. They have other people do their work. They have other people taking these tests. Now, again, I don't want to take anything away from people. Of course, there's those people who, they're putting in their work and yada, yada. But trust me when I say, when people are in these colleges or when people are trying to get into these colleges, they have these sneaky ways of bypassing the system that the average person like you and I can't do. Okay, so don't make it seem like, oh, just because they're rich doesn't mean like they're not working hard and da. Trust me, when you're in those circles, or you're listening to these circles, or you have insight into these circles, you understand that there are a lot of cheating going on. And again, I'm not saying I want to take that away from them, but at the same time, it's like nobody mentions that, and it's a huge deal.
Of academic performance, but it's also driven by well-roundedness variables, which could mean whatever the admission directors want them to mean. And so as a result, you have opportunities to allow old money or the elite to get their way in due to just having a more interesting background or being more well-rounded. Like, participation in certain costly extracurriculars are a way to help screen out lower classes into the Ivy Leagues. The upper classes are available to hire tutors to help increase their descendants' grades. There's the legacy factor, where the legacy admission is basically if your parents or grandparents went to an Ivy League school, then you have preferential treatment on your application of getting into the Ivy League school. Doesn't mean you will get in, but it increases your odds. And it's about 15% of the student body at Ivy League schools are legacy students.
And again, I'm glad that he mentioned that, because there's a lot of things that are a lot of hobbies and curricular activities that are associated with wealth, right? I've never met a poor person ski before. You know what I mean? Now, I'm sure they exist and but of course, it's not common. Skiing, golf, polo, what else? Like you said, they have tutors. That is like the average person growing up in America, at least, or maybe even whatever other country, you don't have access to those things, and it's simply because of the socioeconomic background that you grew up in. But not only that, because you can be rich and still have not a clue that's going on, right? And so a lot of these people who are like legacy students and people who have these extracurricular activities, I'm pretty sure their parents have a deep understanding of the game. As far as, I know who the dean is, I know that he has an organization, I'm going to donate $50,000 to that organization because I want to let him know that, listen, having me as a friend is going to benefit your life a lot better than if you're not my friend. Also, the person that has worked really hard, they come from a very poor family and they have perfect GPA, perfect SAT scores, that person can't donate 5 figures, 6 figures to your foundation. That person doesn't understand the rich culture culture that you're trying to build. That person doesn't understand that. You know what I'm saying? So you got to understand that there are people playing this game in a way that other people will be like, hey, that's not fair. And I've told you, if you watch my last live stream, I told you guys, this is a game to these people. They don't care if you have what's available or not. It's simply who's going to win and who's going to lose.
If you look at overall wealth distribution of Ivy League students, it's over 60% are in the top one families of the top 1% of income. So it's about 650,000 USD or more per year. And then on top of that, you also have other more informal ways you can buy your way into the school. As revealed in Operation Varsity Blues, the minimum bid, essentially, if you want to have a donation that they won't even guarantee it, but will give you your kid extra consideration of getting into the school, it's about 10 million USD. So if you donate 10 million USD to the school to finance some new wing or to increase the endowment or provide a new scholarship fund or whatever, your kid is going to have a better chance of getting into Ivy League school. I remember back when I was in school, I heard rumors like on the scuttlebutt that it was like 1 to 2 million. But like as of 2019, when the last kind of data, quote unquote, came out about this, it increased to about 10, which is the general increased competition of getting into these selective universities. The other real pipeline at Ivy League schools are the elite boarding schools, which I will do a separate video about St. Midas schools because their whole history and their backstory is very interesting. And if you're not familiar, these are some of the elite boarding schools such as St. Paul's and Deerfield that have a disproportionate pipeline to the Ivy Leagues. They're more likely to have major world leaders, politicians, business leaders, and other elites attend these schools. They're on the West Coast schools.
And I remember when I was doing research on this like a long time ago, it gets deep, right? Like you said, these are top boarding schools. I can guarantee that the majority of us have heard of, Harvard, Yale, Duke, all these other like Ivy League schools, but I can guarantee you've probably never heard of these elite boarding schools. And just like if you're in a poor community, there's prison pipeline system? What is it called? It's like school to prison pipeline system. The same way that they have that pipeline system to prison, they have that pipeline system to Ivy League schools. And so you send your kids to these private, very expensive boarding schools. And again, if you've never heard of these schools, go back, rewind, and look at those videos and just put it into TikTok or put it into YouTube or whatever, and be like day in the life at XYZ boarding school or tour of XYZ. It's incredible. These campuses look like Harry Potter. It looks like Hogwarts. You know what I'm saying? It's unreal. And you'll see like they have a whole community of people like opening letters to see if they're getting in and stuff like that. Trust me, bro, this thing gets deep. And this is why I say it's very important that you understand who you are as a man. Crazy. It's very important that you understand who you are as a man, because just because you make a lot of money, there's still an entire world that you are entering when you make a lot of money. And so if you're trying to fit some description just because you make a bunch of money, trust me, bro, it gets very deep, and people can immediately sense that you're new money simply because you don't have the shared experiences that a lot of these other people grew up in. The same way that a lot of people from the ghetto or from the hood understand that you didn't grow up there because you don't have those shared experiences.
Schools like Robert Louis Stevenson, Kate, and Thatcher. And if you went to one of those schools, 33% chance of getting into the Ivy League. Whereas if you went to public school in the United States of America, you have less than 1% chance of getting into the Ivy League. The other thing is funneling through sports that often have higher costs to participate, whether that's rowing or equestrian or sailing or fencing. A lot of these, like, they don't give academic scholarships, so you still got to pay full tuition. But if you're a good athlete at some of these more obscure but financially prohibitive sports, it can also increase your odds. And so that's how
100%. This is exactly what I'm talking about. I didn't even think of equestrian, which, if you don't know what equestrian is, it's just dealing with horses, right? First of all, owning a horse is very expensive, okay? And second of all, just getting to these different sports. Like, how many of your schools offered fencing? How many of your schools offered rowing? Listen, you were lucky if you got a pool in your high school. You get what I'm saying? But again, that's a common norm in these upper echelon places, that fencing, rowing, golf. Now, my school had golf, but you get what I'm saying. And all these other things, rowing and equestrian. sailboating, you know what I'm saying? All these things that if you look at somebody's resume, you're like, okay, this person obviously grew up with money, versus you're going over here and you're like, oh, I took wood shop or cooking classes. You know what I'm saying? I played basketball. You know what I mean? These are the type of things that it's easy to figure out where a person's at on the socioeconomic level simply by the things that they do.
Money and elites, even if they may not qualify solely just based on grades or academics, or even if they do, just to stand out against the sea of middle class students who also have those level of grades and academic performance, can slide in through these workarounds that I mentioned here. And because they have these loopholes around, it's allowed the Ivy Leagues to have it both ways. They can have half of their student body be there solely on merit so that they still have the best and the brightest going to the schools legitimately. And then they have the other half be the elites who are elite through old money or privilege or political connections. And so you get the both worlds. You get the elites that are going to be elite no matter where they went to school. And you have the elites who you have the raw brain power and the potential that you can train through your education to become the next generation of new money elites. So that's kind of how they do this sort of hybrid model. So yeah, if they're in an Ivy League school, chances are they're very bright and they're qualified. But at the same time, there's also a disproportionately high chance that they are old money. And those are not necessarily mutually exclusive, because the elites often got elite due to their intelligence and work ethic and other factors. Does it just apply to Ivy League schools or to other elite institutions as well? Well, it also applies to some of the other elite institutions in the United States, such as Stanford, MIT, and the University of Chicago, where over 40% of students in the top 1% of wealth in the United States, who are also in the top 99 percentile of SAT scores, got into Ivy League schools, whereas that same level of qualification for middle class people is less than 10%. So there is, again, if you are equally qualified, the tie-break kicker is going to be social status and wealth. And it's similar in the UK, where private school students are about 6 to 7% of the student body, but they're about a third of Oxford students. And that's just kind of a reflection of the role of social class and privilege still in the Ivy Leagues. And now we talked about.
And that's the thing that a lot of people like to gloss over and skip over. It's like these things matter. And this isn't the type of channel where we look at and we're like, oh, you know, this isn't fair and we have to make change and do something. This is where we understand is like, this is how it is. This is acceptance. And I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. If I was in their position too, it's like, who would you want to have as a friend? Somebody who came from the bottom, there's nothing, their parents don't have anything, their family is nobody, and the person's just were really smart and gifted and they worked their way to the top, or somebody of the same exact stature where they had the training, they've had the education, they've had the same scores, but their family is rich. Their family is making $1 million plus a year, and that's not even counting the income that they get from their assets. You understand what I'm saying? Because if I ask this person, if I were to ask in a roundabout way, now a lot of people are like, oh, that's illegal. Trust me. You know what I'm saying? Like that, it's illegal if we're saying it out in front of the public. But if I were to imply that I would like a $50,000, $100,000, $250,000 donation to my charity, which I get a percent of because I own the charity. Who do you think is more a person that's going to agree with that? You understand? And again, if you were making $1 million a year, everything was good in your life, you got a couple million in the bank, and somebody asks you for a $100,000 donation, and this is the person that can guarantee that your child gets into an Ivy League school, if that's the goal that you have for your child, or that's the goal that your child has, would you pay that? I know I would. I'm just being honest. And that's the thing. I want us to start building our reality based off of real reality and not how we want the reality to be. Not how we hope to complain it into existence. That's not how this works. I want to know, what's the current situation? Am I qualified to do that? And let's see what happens. Now, of course, if you're a freedom fighter, you're a rebel, you don't want, you say, I want to tear down the whole system, that's amazing. But I'm not doing that, right? So if you're that type of person, good for you. But the reason why I'm making this video today is because I want us to really look at what's going on around here.
About getting into the schools, let's talk about now the outcomes and the results of people coming out of the Ivy League schools. When it comes to outcomes, let's first start with the political class. Depending on if you count people who've dropped out of Congress recently or not, approximately 13 to 15% of members of Congress, House and Senate, have an undergrad or a graduate education from an Ivy League school. Compare that to less than 1% of the overall population of college graduates in the United States. And college graduates even are less than 40% of the population. So that shows really how concentrated a political power really is among the Ivy Leagues. And you have similar high proportions among many state governor level and the lobbyist class. The Supreme Court is the most extreme concentration of Ivy Leagues. Currently, all 9 sitting Supreme Court justices either attended Harvard or Yale Law School. And 8 of the 9 justices received undergraduates from Ivy Leagues as well. When it comes to presidents, there's been a varied academic history, but by far the leading schools for presidents to be alumni have been Ivy League schools, particularly Harvard and Yale. And if you
I remember when I saw that a long time ago, is like you take a list of the presidents and you see where they graduated from. The majority was Ivy League. This is where you start to realize that this isn't something like by chance. You know what I'm saying? This is something that you're born into or bought into. This is something that is intentional by design. It's not something that you just happen out of luck. People, when they're kids, have their whole life figured out by their parents or by their community. And I need you to understand what you're up against if you're the type of person that's switching social economic statuses.
You look at basically presidents since Ronald Reagan. So like in my lifetime, basically every president until Joe Biden had either gone to an Ivy League university for undergrad or graduate. That includes Clinton, George Bush Sr., George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump. And if Harris wins, she will be only the second president in the last 40 years to have not gone to an Ivy League institution for undergrad or graduate school. The Ivy League bias also extends into the business world. When it comes to CEOs of publicly traded companies, the percentage is quite substantial. Approximately 11% of Fortune 500 companies CEOs have an Ivy League degree. When you consider top MBA programs, 40% of Fortune 100 CEOs have graduated from a top 10 MBA program. Not all those are Ivy League, but I include Stanford really as an honorary Ivy League for the purposes of this video because it effectively is. It doesn't really just apply to climbing the corporate ladder. When you include Stanford, the Ivy Leagues and Stanford dominate startup funding. When it comes to undergraduates, Stanford has alone 1,427 alumni founders who have raised venture capital in the last decade. If you include their business school, that number goes up to 4,000. UC Berkeley has the top spot for undergrads with a little over 1,800, but UC Berkeley is no slouch. It ranks higher academically in prestige versus at least 3, if not 4, of the Ivy League institutions. Outside of Berkeley, MIT, and Stanford, the remaining top 10 universities for startup founders are all in the Ivy League, with Harvard ranking 2nd and University of Pennsylvania ranking 5th. When it comes to other statistics that point to the distribution of startup concentration in the elite universities, you have, in terms of unicorn founders, Stanford is the leader, of course. Stanford founders are 1.6 times more likely than an average founder to receive venture capital backing to achieve unicorn status. Yale is the highest probability. Yale alumni are 2 times more likely to achieve unicorn status than other venture-backed startup founders from other universities. 53% of unicorn founders have degrees from the top 10 global universities, which includes Stanford and most of the Ivy League schools. And on top of that, let's just look at billionaires as a whole. There's a disproportionate amount of billionaires who are alumni of either Ivy League schools or Stanford. If you just exclude Ivy League dropouts or people who attended Stanford, just Ivy League graduates, 70 of the top 400 richest people on the Forbes list went to an Ivy League school. That is about a little less than 20%. I'll put the exact number in a text quote here. When it comes, if you include...
And a fun fact about that, if you look up billionaire wives and you see where they got their education from, this no drop in the pond either. This usually either an Ivy League school or something of the equivalent, like they graduated with a double major in like physics or something crazy. You know, I saw this girl on TikTok who was breaking down billionaires' wives and where they went to school and exactly what they graduated in. And these are some smart cookies, all right? It's not some dumb bimbo that you usually get the image of from a billionaire who could get any girl that he wants.
include Stanford alumni and Ivy League dropouts, that number goes up to a little under 26% of the Forbes 400 billionaires or go to one of those schools. Harvard has the most billionaire alumni with 15. University of Pennsylvania has 14. And Yale and Stanford have 12 billionaires each. And the only Ivy League school not to have a billionaire alumni is Brown. And then outside of the Forbes 400, there are also a lot of old money families who have Ivy League degrees overall, just given the fact you have legacy admissions and that, yeah. And if you look at ultra high net worth individuals overall, which by the definition of my source for this, which is Business Insider, they have at least $30 million in net worth. Harvard alone has 1,906 ultra high net worth individuals with a combined net worth of $811 billion. And this kind of strengthens the idea of the correlation between Ivy League attendance and success after. And it's not really just the pure business world and politics. Like the top NGO slots, leading think tank people, if you look at academics, like 80% of college professors at the US News Top 50 have at least one degree from an Ivy League or Stanford in their undergraduate. So even most professors of the less prestigious schools, but still the top of the top in America, all have Ivy League degrees. So it's kind of a closed shop. A lot of it is connections, but a lot of it also is that these are some of the smartest people in America. And I think it's a combination of both merit and elitism, which has been able to perpetuate Ivy League alumni as effectively one of the crucial parts of the ruling class. And that's why in my America old money chart, I did have a specific class called the Ivy League professional class, which was the one right below the establishment elite. And the numbers that I show here and the process on how these people are getting into these schools kind of just explains why they are a class of their own. If you have any questions or comments, kind of just explains.
I actually want to go back and look at this chart. Underclass, dependent on the state or outside the formal economy, working class, middle class, independent professional class, I think that's pretty dope, institutional professional class, Ivy League class, successful business owners, counter elite, and establishment elite. So it's like that. Essentially, if you weren't born into wealth or any of this other thing, the best that you can do is try your hardest to work hard, as go from the working class to then hopefully go to the middle class, and then either go into a skill set, which is the independent professional class or institutional professional class, use that money to then either start your own business or own a lot of assets, which will then bring you up to that point to where you have access to these environments. It doesn't mean that you're going to be successful in these environments, but now you have the at least the capital to, if you have children, to get them tutors, to get them into private schools, to get them into, you get what I'm saying? But you have to understand that the average person, especially if they're starting off in poor or working class conditions, don't have the mentality to even be at that level, to have that much money. And it's not because they're dumb or they're not capable. It's simply because they've had to focus all of their energy just on climbing to the top, versus the people who are already there. They just had to continue what their parents left off. Because I don't know about you, but I plan on teaching my children everything that I've been through thus far, at least so they can have the wisdom. That way they can continue, grab the baton and continue where I left off. So that's going to be today's video. If you like the video, If you let me know what you guys think down below. If you like topics like this, I will keep creating them. And with that, guys, I'll see y'all on the next one. All right, peace out.